you'd just slow us down. That's what my son said, standing in my kitchen, sipping the coffee I brewed for him. He didn't even look up from his phone when he said it. Just tossed it out there like a paper napkin. We thought about inviting you, Mom. But honestly, it's Europe. Long flights, tight schedules, lots of walking. Pauline and I both felt you wouldn't enjoy it. It's not personal. Not personal. I almost laughed. He said it like they'd done me a favor by excluding me, like they'd spared me some exhausting ordeal, when in truth, I had dreamed of this kind of trip all my life. Not the luxury or the sights, but the simple idea of being included, of mattering. You could have asked, I said, folding my hands to keep them from trembling. I would have managed. He looked up then, just briefly. It's not about managing. You've never even used a mobile boarding pass. The pace we're planning, it would just be too much. Too much for who? Pauline sat beside him, dabbing non-existent crumbs from her spotless pantsuit. Your knee's been acting up, remember? You said the stairs at the library made you sore. I also said I was fine the next day. They didn't hear that part, or didn't want to. So, where are you going? I asked, keeping my voice even. Oh, everywhere. My son smiled now, like a boy with a toy catalog. Rome, Florence, Paris, Amsterdam, then maybe a few days in Istanbul, if the flights align. I nodded, as if someone had asked my opinion. We booked everything through a travel agency. There's an app with all the bookings synced, super streamlined. Pauline smiled, tight and efficient. It's just easier this way, Leslie. You'd hate the running around. I had raised that man, helped him with college fees when his loan stalled, paid the deposit on their first house, looked after their boys every weekend for 5 years straight. I had been the one steady presence when his career faltered and Pauline considered a trial separation. But yes, I would slow them down. Sounds like a dream, I said. When do you leave? Friday morning, he replied. Oh, and don't worry about the boys. They'll stay with Pauline's sister. It's all arranged. Arranged. That word again. Everything about their life seemed arranged lately, planned without mess, emotion, or me. After they left, I rinsed their coffee mugs and wiped down the counter. I stood by the sink a long while, watching the sparrows peck at crumbs on the porch. It was nearly spring. The dogwoods were just beginning to bloom. I remembered a different spring 50 years ago when my husband and I honeymooned in Quebec. We'd taken a train, walked everywhere, ate sandwiches on park benches. My knees had worked fine then. They still worked. Maybe not like they used to, but well enough. I sat down at the table, opened my notebook, and began a list. Flight, lodging, currency exchange, travel insurance. I wasn't angry. Not exactly. What I felt was sharper, colder. A kind of click inside me, like a switch being flipped. They thought I was too old to travel. We'd see. I didn't tell anyone. Not even Margaret from across the street, who notices everything from who forgets to bring in their bins to which grandchild visits more often. She'd have insisted I call my son and talk it out, as if the damage was something as mild as a burnt roast. But some things don't need talking. They need action. The next morning, I walked to the library. Not for books, I hadn't been able to concentrate on novels lately, but to use the computer lab. The staff there were kind, and the young man at the desk didn't blink when I asked for help finding flights. Going anywhere special, Mrs. Peterson? Rome, I said. Then Florence? Then maybe somewhere unexpected. He grinned. Bucket list? No, I said steady. Just a list. He showed me how to compare fares, how to choose seats, how to check baggage allowances. I took notes. My handwriting was slower these days, but neat. My hands, thank God, were still steady. Always had been. That night, I spread everything out on the dining table. Laptop, notepad, travel brochures I picked up at the agency. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat under the old lamp my husband once rewired himself. It flickered at first, then settled into a warm hum. 2 hours later, I had my flights booked. Rome first, then Paris. A 3-night stay in Amsterdam. Istanbul, depending on how my legs held up. I called the agency the next day. A young woman named Tanya answered. "Yes, ma'am. We can arrange those hotels for you. Would you like airport pickup too?" "No, thank you," I said. "I can manage." I gave her the dates. She was efficient, polite, never once asked if I was traveling alone. I appreciated that. Before we hung up, she said, "Do you want travel insurance with medical coverage?" "Yes." "And should we link your itinerary to any family member's account?" I paused. "No. This one's mine." Packing took time. Not because I had too much, but because I wanted every item to earn its place. I laid out my walking shoes, the good pair with the orthopedic soles, a navy dress that didn't wrinkle easily, my late husband's scarf, which still held a trace of his aftershave. Not that I was sentimental. I just liked the feel of it. I packed small. I wanted to move light. The night before the flight, I sat on my porch and watched the house across the street. The lights in their windows, the faint sounds of a TV comedy I couldn't make out. I thought about calling my son. But what would I say? "You forgot I was once someone who walked 5 miles to school and back? You forgot who raised you with hands that folded laundry at 6 a.m. and signed mortgage papers by candlelight?" No, I wouldn't beg for inclusion. I was going anyway. At dawn, I called for a cab. Not because I couldn't drive, but because I didn't want to worry about parking. The driver, a boy not much older than my grandson, looked surprised when he saw my suitcase. "Heading somewhere, ma'am?" "Yes," I said. "Europe." He whistled. "Good for you." I smiled and leaned back as we drove through the quiet streets of my town. Dogwoods in bloom, neighbors still asleep, everything unchanged, except me. At the airport, I stood in line with my boarding pass in hand, not digital, printed, folded neatly in my purse. A few lanes over, I saw them. My son, Pauline, the rolling suitcases, the efficient backpacks. The laughter I used to know. I didn't approach, I didn't wave. They didn't look in my direction. And that was fine. I was already on my way. The flight was long, but not unbearable. I had chosen a window seat and packed my own tea bags, chamomile and mint, because I don't like airline coffee and I've never trusted those tiny plastic creamers. The woman next to me, maybe in her 40s, spent the first half of the flight typing furiously on a laptop and the second half sleeping with a scarf pulled over her head. We didn't exchange a word. It suited me just fine. When the plane descended over Rome, the sun was rising, soft gold over endless rows of red roofs. I'd seen photos, of course, postcards and guidebooks over the years, but nothing prepared me for that first moment. The city looked ancient and alive all at once, like it remembered every footstep ever taken across its stones. I waited until the others had rushed out. No reason to hurry. I had nowhere to be, no schedule to keep. That was the beauty of doing this alone. I wasn't part of anyone's plan. I was finally living mine. The customs officer looked at my passport and raised his brows. "First time?" "Yes," I answered, steady. He smiled, stamped the page, and waved me through. Outside, I found the taxi line and gave the driver the name of my hotel, saying it carefully. "Via del Viminale." He nodded without a word and turned up the radio. Italian voices poured through the speakers, fast and melodic. I didn't understand a word, but somehow I felt soothed, like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The hotel was modest. A small place with potted plants in the windows and faded murals in the lobby. My room was on the third floor, up an old lift that groaned its way through the levels like a man clearing his throat. When I opened the door, I didn't feel the nervous flutter I expected, just calm. I unpacked slowly, setting my things in drawers, hanging up my dress. Then I made tea, using the electric kettle I'd insisted on bringing. It made me laugh. Other travelers had their selfie sticks and fancy apps. I had a collapsible kettle and a Ziploc of tea bags. We all have our essentials. After a rest and a short nap, I ventured out. The street was cobbled and uneven, but my shoes held. I walked slowly, passing shops with tiny doors and old men smoking at sidewalk cafes. No one paid me much attention. That suited me, too. I ended up at the edge of a piazza I'd seen in a travel magazine years ago. Piazza della Repubblica. It looked like a painting. Fountains, pale buildings, people moving in every direction without rushing. I found a bench and sat, just breathing it all in. That's when she sat beside me. A woman, maybe around my age, with a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses too big for her face. She carried herself like someone who used to be noticed more than she was now, and didn't mind the change. "Bella giornata," she said, smiling. I knew enough to nod and smile back. "Beautiful day." "You speak Italian?" she asked in careful English. "Only enough to order dessert." She laughed, light and genuine. "That's all you need in Rome." Her name was Bianca, a widow like me. Lived in Trastevere. Her children lived elsewhere, she said with a small shrug. Not far, but somehow always too busy. I knew that shrug. We talked for an hour, about weather, about the best place to find fresh figs, about nothing at all. When she finally stood, she touched my arm lightly. "You come tomorrow," she said. "I show you my favorite cafe. No tourists." I smiled. I'd like that. She walked away slowly, disappearing into the street's rhythm like she'd always been part of it. I sat a while longer. Then I took out my little notebook and made a new list. Not flights or bookings this time. This one read, "Try Bianca's Cafe. Walk as far as my knees allow. Eat something without checking the calorie chart. Send a postcard." But not to them. Remember how it feels to be visible. As I walked back to my hotel, the bells of some distant church rang out over the city, and I felt, for the first time in a long time, entirely whole. The next morning, I woke to the sound of church bells echoing through the narrow street below my window. Rome didn't sleep quietly. Scooters buzzed like bees through the night, and someone had shouted in the alley around midnight. But I'd slept better than I had in years. Deep, dreamless, as if my body finally believed I was where I belonged. I took my time getting ready, slid into my slacks and a linen blouse, comfortable but clean. Applied a touch of lipstick. Not for anyone else, just because I wanted to see color in the mirror. Bianca met me in the hotel lobby as promised. She wore bright turquoise and carried a small straw bag. "You look rested," she said, appraising me with quick, kind eyes. "I feel rested," I replied. Strange, but I do. She led me through the winding streets with confidence, pointing out fountains tucked into walls and bakeries hidden behind ivy-covered doors. The cafe she loved was a small place near the Tiber, run by two elderly brothers who spoke no English and served cappuccino in tiny porcelain cups with saucers that didn't match. I sat at a table by the window, watching as Bianca argued good-naturedly with one of the owners about the quality of his biscotti. "You'll like it," she said, handing me a plate. "Crunchy. Not like that supermarket nonsense." She was right. It tasted of almonds and something floral I couldn't name. I took my time chewing. Let the flavor settle. "Where's your family now?" Bianca asked after a while. I looked out the window. "Somewhere between Florence and Venice, I think." "They don't know you're here?" "No." She didn't ask why, just nodded and poured more coffee. "I used to think," I said slowly, "that if I kept giving, eventually they'd see me again. Not as someone useful, just see me." "They never stopped seeing you," she said gently. "They just decided you were furniture." I laughed before I could stop myself. "That's exactly it. You don't move. You're always there. So they put things on top of you and forget you exist. And I never made them move anything." Bianca reached over and took my hand. "Well, you moved yourself." We spent the day walking. She took me to a flea market by the river, where I bought a silk scarf and a chipped ceramic angel I had no room for. We climbed halfway up a hill before my knee stiffened, and she insisted we take a taxi down. "No pride," she said, waving off my protest. "Just knees." Back in my room that evening, I sat on the bed and looked at my phone. No messages. Not that I expected any. My son had posted something on social media earlier that day, a group photo of them in front of a canal, all smiles. I wasn't tagged. Of course I wasn't. I stared at it for a long time. Then I opened a new post of my own, a photo of my cappuccino. No caption, just that. A quiet little flag planted in my own corner of the map. That night, I wrote in my notebook again. Not a list, just one sentence. I am still capable of surprise. The wind moved outside like a whisper. The church bells rang again, softer this time. And for the first time, I didn't think about what I'd been left out of. I thought about where I might go next. 2 days later, I took the train to Florence. Bianca hugged me tightly at the platform. "Take your time there," she said. "Don't just chase the monuments. Look at the walls, the windows. That's where the soul is." I promised I would. Then I boarded the train and found my seat by the window, opposite a young man with headphones and a suitcase that looked like it had never seen dirt. He nodded politely and didn't say a word. I liked that. The countryside rolled past in shades of green I'd forgotten existed. Vineyards, small farms, the occasional glimpse of a terracotta roof. I dozed once or twice, my head leaning gently against the cool glass, dreaming of nothing in particular. When we pulled into Firenze Santa Maria Novella, it was mid-afternoon. The station buzzed with noise and people, but I didn't feel lost. I felt ready. My hotel was a short walk, old stone steps, a narrow elevator that wheezed louder than the one in Rome. The woman at the front desk handed me a real key, not a plastic card. "Enjoy your stay, signora," she said, smiling like she meant it. I dropped off my bag and set out. Florence is a city made for walkers and lingerers. The streets curve like they're telling secrets. I wandered aimlessly, letting my feet decide. When I reached the Piazza della Signoria, a crowd had gathered around a violinist playing under a statue. I stopped too. He played Vivaldi. Not a recording, not a performance, just music, straight from his gut. And for a moment, I forgot everything. My family, their absence, the dull ache in my knee. All of it. I dropped a coin in his case before I left. More than I meant to. Less than it was worth. The next morning, I visited the Uffizi. I'd booked my ticket weeks ago. Inside, I took my time, standing in front of the Botticellis and Caravaggios without looking at my watch. Around me, younger tourists snapped photos and rushed on. I didn't take a single picture. I just stood there, breathing in brushstrokes. Outside the museum, I stopped at a cafe for lunch. Small place. No frills. A woman at the next table ordered something in rapid Italian, then paused to adjust her shawl. She looked up, met my eyes. Traveling alone? There was no judgment in her voice, just curiosity. Yes, she smiled, not unkindly. That's rare. Not as rare as it should be, I replied. Her name was Elena, a painter from Naples visiting Florence for inspiration. We talked for half an hour about everything and nothing, art, grief, stubborn joints. She gave me her email. If you come south, she said, let me show you my village. I tucked the paper into my notebook. That evening, walking back to my hotel through the dusk, I heard my name. Mom? The voice froze me. I turned. There he was, my son, Henry. He stood a few feet away holding his phone, blinking like he wasn't sure it was really me. Behind him, Pauline browsed scarves in a street stall. What? What are you doing here? I looked at him. Really looked. He was sunburned, tired, the bags under his eyes deeper than I remembered. Walking, I said, like the tourists do. He stepped closer. You didn't tell us you were coming. You didn't invite me. He opened his mouth, closed it again. Mom, come on. I raised a hand. Not angry, just done. I won't interrupt your vacation, I said. Florence is big enough for both of us. He hesitated. Wait, can we at least... I have dinner plans, I lied. Then I turned and kept walking, not fast, but firm. He didn't follow, and when I reached the hotel, I finally exhaled. My hands were steady. My heart was not broken. It was beating, strong and sure. The funny thing was, I didn't feel shaken after seeing him. Not in the way I would have a few months ago. If anything, I felt certain. The kind of certainty that doesn't need explanation or confrontation. Just direction. I left Florence the next morning. Took a slow train north, changing at Milan, then again in Lyon. I didn't rush. Didn't check my watch. I let the hours stretch and soften. At my age, that's a small kind of rebellion, to let time serve you instead of chasing it. Paris greeted me with rain, the good kind, light, slanted, theatrical. The kind that turns cobblestones glossy and makes you believe the city's been rehearsing its beauty all day just for you. My hotel was tucked behind the Luxembourg Gardens, on a quiet street where every window had iron balconies with chipped paint. My room had 2 chairs, 1 lamp, and a view of a chimneyed rooftop. It was perfect. The man at reception called me Madame, and I liked how the word sounded in his voice. Neither old nor young, just respected. I hadn't felt that in a while. The next morning, I did something entirely out of character. I left the map behind. I simply walked, letting my instincts steer. Through alleyways, up and down uneven streets, pausing for espresso at a stand where nobody spoke English, and the sugar came in tiny glass jars. A young man in a beret gave me an approving nod when I handed him the coins without fumbling. I must have looked the part. Later, at a bookstore near the Seine, I found an English copy of a book I loved in college. I hadn't thought of it in years. I bought it without hesitation. That afternoon, I sat under a tree in the garden and read for hours, stopping only when the light began to change. And then, something curious happened. A woman approached, young, maybe 30, with a kind face and a camera slung across her chest. She asked in French if she could sit beside me. I smiled and gestured to the bench. Merci, she said, settling in. We sat in silence for several minutes, both watching the garden. Then she turned slightly toward me and said, in careful English, "You remind me of my grandmother. She passed last year." I looked at her surprised. She used to read under trees too, never rushed. "That's the best way to read," I said. She nodded. "She always said the world hurries too much for no reason." Smart woman. We talked for a while about Paris, about photography, about missing people you can't talk to anymore. Her name was Sabine. She showed me a photo of her grandmother, and I saw what she meant. The same shape to the shoulders, the same habit of folding hands in the lap. Before she left, she asked if she could take my picture. I hesitated. "Not for the internet," she promised. "Just for me. For the memory." I agreed. She took it quietly, without posing me, without fanfare. Then she thanked me and left, her scarf fluttering behind her like a ribbon in wind. That night, I wrote again. Paris is not for the young. It's for the unafraid. I didn't check social media. I didn't wonder what my family was doing. If they were still in France, we hadn't crossed paths again. The city had a way of making even familiar people disappear unless you truly wanted to find them. And I didn't. Not now. Instead, I spent my days in museums, bookstores, small parks. I ate pastries with names I couldn't pronounce. I spoke when I wanted, stayed quiet when I didn't. On my 5th day, I sat by the river and watched boats slide by. One of them had music playing, something old, maybe Edith Piaf. The sound carried over the water, tangled with the breeze. I closed my eyes and let it drift through me. Not once did I feel alone. Lonely is what happens when you wait to be seen. Alone is what happens when you finally see yourself. And I liked what I saw. It was supposed to be just another afternoon. I'd walked all morning through the Marais district, stopped at a little gallery that had paintings of nothing but blue. Blue skies, blue boats, blue dresses. The kind of quiet absurdity that makes you laugh out loud in a room where no one else is laughing. I bought a postcard. Not for anyone. Just because. Then I took the metro, got off 3 stops too early, and wandered until I found a bench under a linden tree that smelled like honey. I was mid-bite into a croissant when I saw them, across the square, laughing, camera in hand. Henry, Pauline, and their friends. 2 couples I didn't recognize, younger, louder, dressed like travel bloggers with matching canvas backpacks, and the smug ease of people who've never lost anything they couldn't replace. They didn't see me. I was just another older woman on a bench, and for a split second, I considered getting up, walking over, saying, "Surprise." But I didn't. Instead, I watched. Pauline pointed to something on a menu. Henry rolled his eyes and made a joke. She smacked his shoulder, laughing. Their friends joined in. Glasses of wine arrived. Someone took a selfie. I realized then I wasn't missing anything. This wasn't some radiant family moment from a holiday commercial. This was just a lunch. And I was just someone who had once believed that being left out meant being less than. But I wasn't. I sat quietly, finished my croissant, and watched the fountain across the square instead. A child dipped his fingers in the water and shrieked. A woman adjusted her umbrella. The wind smelled like bread. They left 20 minutes later, turning the corner with the casual, comfortable arrogance of people who believe the world will always arrange itself around them. They never looked back. And that was fine. I stayed on the bench a while longer, letting the sunlight hit my knees. My hip ached, but not terribly. just enough to remind me I'd walked farther than usual. That evening, back at the hotel, there was a message on my phone. Not from Henry, from someone else. Charlie, my grandson, the youngest. His message was simple. Grandma, are you okay? I had a strange feeling today. I know you're probably back home, but I don't know. Just thinking about you. Miss you. I stared at the screen a long time. Then I typed back, I'm not home, but I'm okay. In fact, I'm better than okay. Tell me how you are. He responded instantly. Within minutes, we were texting like two people who hadn't spoken in years, which of course we hadn't. Not properly. Not since he was 16 and stayed with me one summer after a fight with his father. We'd made pancakes. He'd mowed the lawn. I'd thought maybe, just maybe, something real had taken root. And maybe it had. Now he was 23, in graduate school, studying urban planning, dating someone named Jordan, stressed, tired, but still full of that same quiet sweetness. I always felt like you understood me better than anyone, he wrote. I sat there, blinking at the screen. Then I typed, slowly. Thank you. That means more than you know, he replied with a heart. Then another message. Where are you, really? I took a photo of my room, the open window, the rooftops of Paris. Here, I wrote. But not forever. We didn't say much after that. Just a few more lines, soft, careful. But something inside me shifted. That night, I didn't write in my notebook. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what the next line would have been. Some ties fray. Others, they hold. I left Paris without ceremony. Just a cab at 6 a.m, the sky still pale and empty, streets washed clean by the night. I didn't cry. I didn't linger. I just zipped up my coat and rolled my suitcase across the quiet lobby floor, nodding to the young man at reception who had started to remember my tea preferences. The train to Amsterdam was smooth and fast. Outside the window, the landscape shifted. Flat fields, wind turbines, canals. It felt like being quietly delivered into a softer world. The kind where nothing was expected of you except to show up. And I was good at showing up. Always had been. My hotel was by a canal, as narrow and tall as all the others. Its staircase, a spiral that looked like a challenge, issued directly to my knees. But I made it. One slow step at a time. The room was simple, warm. I liked it immediately. I hadn't planned anything. No tours, no checklists. That was the difference now. I'd stopped proving I deserved the trip. I simply took it. That first afternoon, I wandered through the Jourdan district, ducking into shops that sold nothing I needed and bookstores where the owners didn't mind if you just read. I bought myself a notebook bound in soft green leather, thinner than the one I'd been using. A fresh start. It wasn't until my second evening that I found the bench. It was by the canal, under a leaning tree with peeling bark. Nothing marked it as special, but I sat there anyway. And as the city wound down around me, bikes clicking by, lovers arguing softly across the water, I remembered a different bench. A memory I hadn't let surface in years. It was a Sunday afternoon, maybe 1967. My husband, Harold, and I sat on a bench in a park outside Montreal. We were young and broke and wildly hopeful. I had just found out I was pregnant. We didn't tell anyone yet. We just sat there, our fingers tangled, his coat around my shoulders, the knowledge passing between us like a current. I hadn't thought of that day in decades. But in Amsterdam, by that quiet water, it returned, fully formed, whole. I opened my new notebook. And for the first time in this trip, I didn't write lists. I didn't jot down plans. I wrote to him. Harold, I made it. You'd laugh at how long it took me, at how I packed too many socks and not enough sweaters. You'd tell me I looked good in that silly hat Bianca insisted I buy in Rome. You'd point at the pastries in Paris and pretend to count calories, then eat two anyway. You'd fall asleep on the trains, your head on my shoulder, drooling just a little. I would have let you. Of course I would have. I've missed you. I don't say it much, not even in my head. But it's there, under everything. I hope you'd be proud of me. I hope you know that somewhere along the way, I remembered how to live, not just endure. That counts for something, right? I closed the notebook. The sun dipped lower. The water glimmered. Somewhere nearby, a radio played an old song I couldn't name, and just for a moment, I felt him. Not as a ghost, not as a sorrow, but as a part of me that had never really left. I sat there a long time, until the air grew colder, until the past folded itself gently back into the present, and I stood, slowly, knees protesting, but holding, still holding. The message came just after breakfast. I was sitting in a quiet corner of the hotel's cafe, stirring sugar into my coffee, when my phone buzzed on the table. The name on the screen made my breath catch. Charlie. I opened it, expecting a quick hello, maybe another sweet note like the ones we'd exchanged in Paris. But this one was different. Grandma, I talked to Dad about everything. I know it's not my place, but he needs to hear from you. He won't admit it, but I think he's ashamed. And afraid. I told him what I think. How wrong they were not to include you. I hope you're okay. Just wanted you to know someone said something. I stared at the words, coffee growing cold beside me. I hadn't expected him to say anything, and yet it didn't surprise me. Charlie had always had that quiet backbone, that slow way of moving through the world like he was still choosing who he wanted to be, not just reacting to it. I typed back, "Thank you, sweetheart. You didn't have to, but you did. That means more than I can say." He replied almost instantly, "Can I ask something? Would you write him? Not for his sake. For you. I think maybe you've needed to say some things for a long time." I didn't respond right away. I sat there, looking out at the canal, the slow parade of bicycles and couples and geese flapping noisily across the water. The sun was struggling behind clouds, but there was still a soft glow to the morning, a kind of hush. And Charlie was right. I had words sitting inside me. They'd lived there for years, buried under smiles and patience and grace, but they were still mine. So I went upstairs, pulled out the green notebook, and began. "Henry, you once told me I was the most dependable person you knew, that I never wavered, never let things fall through the cracks. I think you meant it as a compliment. But I realize now it was also permission. Permission to forget I was a person, not a structure. You built your life knowing I'd always hold, no matter what. And for years, I did. I made excuses when you didn't call. Smiled through holidays where I was invited out of duty, not affection. I paid for your children's school, your mortgages, your vacations. Not because I was manipulated, but because I wanted to help. But help turned into expectation, and expectation turned into silence. You stopped seeing me, and I let you. The trip you planned, the one I was too old, too slow, too inconvenient to join, I hope it was beautiful. Truly, I hope you laughed and explored and ate well. But more than anything, I hope one day you understand what it means to be quietly erased. Because that's what it felt like. This letter isn't a demand for apology. I'm not writing to be forgiven or reabsorbed. I'm writing because I want you to know I'm still here, still thinking, still moving, still choosing. You didn't take that away from me. I wish you well, and I hope someday you wish the same for me. Mom. I didn't send it right away. I reread it twice, folded the page. Then I took a walk. Nothing special. Just through the nearby market where tulips spilled out of buckets and old men argued over cheese. When I came back, I snapped a photo of the letter, attached it to a message, sent it. There was no reply for hours, but I didn't sit by the phone. I went out for dinner, alone. I ordered something I couldn't pronounce and ate every bite. The reply came just before dawn. I woke early, habit mostly, and saw the glow of the phone screen from the nightstand. For a moment, I just stared at it. A single notification, a message from Henry. I sat up slowly, pulled the blanket around my shoulders, and opened it. Mom, I don't even know what to say. I read your letter 5 times. I'm not proud of myself. I'm not sure I ever will be again. But I needed to hear it. And I'm sorry. Truly. Pauline and I, we didn't think. We just planned. And in doing that, we erased you. That's exactly the word. I wish I could take it back. I don't expect anything from you. But thank you for writing to me. No excuses, no defenses. Just that. I sat with it a while, not smiling, not crying, just breathing in the quiet, letting it settle. I typed a short reply, not out of anger, not out of pride, but from clarity. Thank you for hearing me. That's all I needed. That morning, I walked farther than I had in weeks, across bridges, through neighborhoods I hadn't marked on any map. I stopped at a cafe with no tourists in sight and ordered black coffee and an apple tart that was more crust than fruit. It was perfect. Across the street, in a small storefront window, I saw something that made me stop mid-bite. A law office. The sign on the door said, in neat gold lettering, Family Planning and Asset Management. And just like that, a new thought arrived. Not vengeful, not bitter, just necessary. That afternoon, I called my financial advisor back in the States, a patient man named Elliot, who always spoke in careful phrases like he thought I might misunderstand him, which, for years, I let him believe. Mrs. Peterson, he said cheerfully. Calling from Europe, are we? I am, and I need to make a few changes. Of course, what kind? I want to open a trust account for my grandson, Charlie. There was a pause. Just Charlie? Yes, just him. And I want the language clear. It's not to be altered by anyone else. Understood. We talked details. I gave him permission to begin drafting the paperwork. Told him I'd come in person once I was home, but that I needed the structure ready before I got off the plane. When we hung up, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt grounded. For the first time in a long time, the future had shape. Not for me. I wasn't planning decades ahead, but for someone I believed in. Someone who still saw me not as a resource, but a person. That night, I took out my notebook and wrote one last list. Things I've done without permission. Traveled across 4 countries alone. Ordered dessert twice in one day. Walked out of silence and into my own voice. Changed the course of my legacy. Remembered who I was before I was needed. I closed the book and placed it on the nightstand. My hands didn't shake. My breath was steady. Tomorrow, I'd leave Amsterdam. Next stop, Istanbul. One more city before home. One more step in the life I wasn't invited to live, but chose anyway. Istanbul hit me like a chord. A little off balance at first, louder, faster, heavier, but rich in ways that made my whole body feel like it was being tuned to something ancient and new at the same time. The driver who picked me up from the airport spoke English with a heavy accent and drove like the road was chasing him. First time? He asked, glancing at me in the mirror. Yes. You will love. It's loud, but alive. That felt like a warning and a promise. The hotel was a narrow, honey-colored building just off the Galata Bridge, the kind that always seems taller inside than it looks from the street. The room had a window facing the Bosphorus. From it, I could see boats drifting like pieces of a story I hadn't read yet. I unpacked only the essentials. My knees were tired. My feet complained. But my heart was alert, quiet, ready. I spent my first day slowly, one foot in front of the other, through crowded bazaars where merchants beckoned with silk scarves and tea and polished brass, through narrow alleys that opened into wide squares. The call to prayer echoed through the air like a reminder not to rush. In the evening, I sat at a rooftop cafe and drank apple tea so sweet it stung my tongue. Below, the city pulsed with light and clamor, and voices overlapping like waves. It was overwhelming, and I didn't mind. That night, I dreamt of my mother. Not the worn-out, quiet woman I remembered in her final years, but younger, standing at her own stove, wearing that red checkered apron she always swore was lucky. In the dream, she looked up at me and said nothing. She just nodded, as if to say, "Took you long enough." The next morning, I walked to the edge of the water and sat with my notebook. I didn't write to Harold this time. I wrote to myself. You did it. You crossed oceans. You made your own itinerary. You stopped apologizing for being alive. You started choosing again instead of waiting to be chosen. You are not the sum of your usefulness. You are not background. You are breath, voice, weight, worth. Later that day, I visited the Hagia Sophia. I stood beneath its dome for a long time, not thinking, not praying, just listening to the way sound moved through the stone. Centuries of footsteps, whispered wishes, reverent silence, all held in the air like breath that had never left. A young woman offered to take my picture. I hesitated, then handed her the phone. "Smile?" she asked, but I didn't. I stood still, looking straight ahead. Not smiling, not apologizing, just there. Solid. Afterward, I walked through the spice market. The smells were dizzying. Cinnamon, cumin, dried citrus, rose. I bought nothing. Tasted everything. Let myself drift from stall to stall like someone who had nowhere to be. That night, I found an email from Elliot. The trust account was in place. All funds secured. Everything allocated to Charlie. No one else could touch a penny. I reread the confirmation 3 times. Then I forwarded it to my own email. Not because I doubted Elliot, but because I liked the act of seeing it arrive. Like proof that something inside me had finally clicked back into place. Not anger, not revenge, just order, just balance. My family wouldn't understand. Maybe not ever, but they didn't have to. I did. And that was enough. I flew home without telling anyone. No airport welcome, no banners or questions. Just me and my single suitcase rolling across the familiar floor of Terminal B, my name unspoken, my presence unnoticed, which, strangely, was exactly what I wanted. The air back home felt stiller somehow, quieter, like the world had paused while I was gone, waiting to see who I'd return as. I took a cab, gave my address softly. The driver didn't ask why I smelled like spice and old train stations. The house looked the same. White paint peeling just a little near the porch. Mail neatly stacked behind the screen door. The neighbor's cat still sleeping in the same spot on my steps. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The quiet was immediate, thick, familiar. But this time, it didn't feel like absence. It felt like space, like room, My hands moved without thinking, unpacking, setting the kettle, sorting laundry. But my mind wandered, not to where I'd been, not even to who I'd seen, but to who I'd finally stopped waiting for, them. I made tea, sat in my favorite chair, opened the green notebook, and stared at a blank page for a long while before writing. They did not change. But I did. It wasn't dramatic. There were no trumpets, no declarations. Just a slow, quiet shedding of the woman who once bent every plan around other people's comfort, who once believed presence was enough to earn love. I didn't want to be included anymore if it meant being tolerated. Later that afternoon, I walked to the post office and dropped a letter in the box. Not to Henry, not even to Pauline, to Charlie. I'd written it on the plane. Dear Charlie, thank you for your message in Paris. You were the only one who thought to ask how I was, instead of where I was. That matters. That's rare. That's love. I wanted you to know I've made arrangements. Financial ones. I won't get into the details now, it'll all become clear when the time comes. But what I've set aside for you, not out of obligation but out of trust. You see people, you listen, you ask. That's more than I can say for most. I'm not writing this to burden you. I don't expect you to fix anything. I just want you to know that someone believes in the way you move through the world, and that when the time comes, you won't have to start from zero. Not every gift has strings, and not every elder gives from guilt. Some of us give because we've seen what kindness looks like when it's not transactional. Take care of yourself, Charlie, and take your time becoming who you're meant to be. I'll be watching. With pride. Love, Grandma. I dropped it in the box without hesitation. Then I walked home, one hand in my coat pocket, the other trailing along the old fence as I passed. That evening, I lit a candle for Harold. I didn't say anything, just sat in the glow, not mourning, not even remembering, just resting. For the first time in a house that now finally belonged to me. Fully. Completely. Not because no one else lived in it, but because I'd stopped waiting to be invited into my own life. A week passed before I heard from anyone. The silence from Henry's side wasn't surprising. Pauline, I imagined, had turned my letter into another item on her invisible list of grievances. Unpredictable behavior from an aging parent, perhaps. But Charlie? Charlie showed up. Not with warning, not with flowers. Just a quiet knock on my door one Wednesday afternoon as the sun slid low behind the neighbor's oak. I opened the door, and there he was. Taller than I remembered. A little leaner, a little more tired in the eyes, but real. He smiled. Hey, Grandma. Come in, I said simply. We sat in the kitchen. I poured tea without asking. He didn't speak at first, just looked around like everything was slightly smaller than he remembered, but familiar in a way that pinched the chest. I got your letter, he said finally. I hoped you would. He looked at me. Really looked. Did you really go to all those places? I nodded. He let out a breath. That's amazing, honestly. It was necessary. He sipped his tea, eyes lingering on the old spoon rest shaped like a chicken, the one he made in kindergarten. I never took it off the counter. I think I always knew, he said quietly, that something was wrong. The way they treated you. The way they expected things. I said nothing. Let the silence do what words couldn't. He looked up again. I just never knew what to do about it. You did exactly what you needed to, I said. You saw me. That's more than most ever tried. He nodded, eyes shining now. When you didn't come to the wedding, Dad acted like you'd canceled last minute. Said you were too tired. I raised an eyebrow. Too tired to be dismissed? Charlie snorted. Exactly. We sat a while, the air in the kitchen warming with memory. I took out a tin of shortbread and slid it across the table. He smiled like he used to at 8 years old, pure, delighted, honest. I told my dad I was coming here, he said between bites. He didn't like it. I imagine not. He asked if you'd forgiven him. I met his eyes. Forgiveness is a word people use when they want to skip the hard part. He nodded slowly. What's the hard part? Change. Charlie leaned back, exhaling through his nose. Yeah, that tracks. We didn't solve anything, didn't hug and cry and patch the years with sentiment, but something passed between us in that kitchen. Something bigger than apology or comfort. Recognition. Later, as he stood to leave, he paused at the door. Can I come back next week? I smiled. The soft kind. The kind I hadn't used in a long time. You never had to ask. After he left, I stood at the window for a while, watching his car pull away. My tea had gone cold. The kitchen had fallen quiet again. But it didn't feel empty. That evening, I opened the green notebook again, and I wrote. Sometimes, the smallest door opens onto the largest field. Sometimes, one good seed is enough. Sometimes, you don't need to repair the old bridge. You just need to build a new path. I didn't expect anything from Henry after that. He was never cruel, not in the obvious ways. Just efficient, selective. The kind of man who handled emotion the way some people handle taxes, only when absolutely necessary and preferably through someone else. So when the envelope arrived in the mail, a real one, hand-addressed, I knew it wasn't from Pauline. Inside was a letter. 3 pages. Careful handwriting. No signature at the end, just, your son, Henry. I read it once, then again, then folded it and placed it back in the envelope. Not because it didn't move me, but because I didn't feel the need to carry it around. Some things, you let land where they fall, and you keep walking. He said he was sorry. He said he had misjudged what you needed. Said he thought he'd been protecting me from difficulty, not removing me from joy. Said he hadn't realized how many times he'd walked past me on the way to his own comfort. All true, all late. But late is not the same as useless. I didn't reply. Not out of spite. Out of peace. Some threads don't need to be knotted again. Just gently placed down, acknowledged for what they were, and allowed to rest. I had one more thing to do. At the library, I found a young woman at the front desk. New, maybe 25, with streaks of blue in her hair and glasses too big for her face. She looked up and smiled. Can I help you? I'm donating a few things, I said. Journals, a travel guide or two. And a map I marked up more than I meant to. She reached for the bag. That's wonderful, thank you. I hesitated. There's a notebook in there too, green, leather. You don't have to display it. But maybe keep it, in case some woman comes in here one day and needs to remember that it's not too late. She looked at me then, really looked. I will, she said. I promise. I left before I could change my mind. That night, I pulled out my final notebook, the one I hadn't written in yet. Just a blank cover, no lines. I didn't want rules for this one. I opened to the first page and wrote slowly. There are things I didn't say, not because I didn't feel them, but because feeling them was enough. I spent the next morning gardening, first time since last fall. The dirt felt good under my nails, grounding, humbling. I trimmed the hydrangeas, cleared the dead leaves, found a small feather in the soil, and tucked it behind my ear like I used to when I was young and no one was watching. Later, I called the attorney. I want to come in this week, I said. Review my will. Finalize the trust. He said he'd clear his schedule. I didn't tell Charlie. Not yet. He didn't need that kind of weight on his shoulders. He just needed to know he was seen, that his kindness had shape now. Structure, not repayment. Legacy. That evening, I stood in the hallway outside the guest room. Still as it was the day I left for Rome, a suitcase on the top shelf, an extra pillow, the soft ticking of the old clock on the wall. I didn't open the door. I just stood there, hand resting on the frame, not in sadness, but in stillness. Like someone who's walked every road they needed to, and now finally sees the map for what it really is. Not a record of where you were, but of how far you've come. I didn't plan the gathering. Charlie did. He called me one afternoon, hesitant. Would you come to the house? Not theirs, mine. Just a small dinner. Me, Jordan, a few people. Nothing formal. I said yes without asking who the few people were. When I arrived, the table was already set. Mismatched plates, candles in short glasses, a vase of wildflowers clearly picked without a plan. It was imperfect, honest, beautiful. Jordan hugged me first. Warm, immediate. We've heard so much about you, I smiled. Hopefully not all at once. Charlie pulled out my chair. I hope this isn't strange. It's not, I said. It's simple, and that's rare. We ate, talked, laughed in small bursts. No one said anything about Istanbul or Paris or the trust. No one asked for stories I didn't want to tell. Then, after dessert, store-bought pie, too sweet and perfect in its own way. Charlie stood. I want to read something, he said, holding a folded paper. If that's okay. He looked at me. I nodded. He cleared his throat. It's a letter, not from me. My chest tightened. He began. If you're hearing this, it means I've passed, which, frankly, is the only way I'd let myself be played aloud in front of a group. So let me say this once, clearly. You mattered. You were not difficult. You were not forgettable. You were a woman who gave, and then, finally, decided to stop giving herself away. And I hope, truly, that anyone listening now will remember this. It is never too late to live without apology. Not for your age, not for your silence, not for your clarity. You don't need permission to reclaim your name, your place, your story. You just need to start walking, and if you don't know where to go forward. Go toward the part of your life that still waits to be lived. With love, always, me. When he finished, no one spoke. I wiped a tear. Quietly, no sobbing, no drama, just release. Later, as we cleared plates, Charlie pulled me aside. Did you really write that for us? He asked. No, I said. I wrote it for me, but I don't mind if you borrow it. He grinned. I think a lot of people should hear it. Then let them. We stood in the doorway together, looking out at the street. The porch light buzzed. A cat moved across the neighbor's yard, and I felt it again. That quiet certainty. Not pride, not even peace, just presence. I had lived through dismissal, through forgetting, through being trimmed down to something neat and small and manageable, and I'd grown back. Not louder, just rooted. If you've ever felt the same, if you've been made invisible, convenient, or set aside, know this. You're not alone, and you're not done. There's a life ahead that doesn't wait for invitations. Start walking. If this story echoed something in you, share it. Leave a comment. Tell someone who needs it. They still matter. And it's not too late.